We as a society consume a lot of resources to sustain ourselves, whether that be using lots of energy in our houses or consuming an unearthly amount of food. All these resources that we take for granted are created through long, tedious processes. Often, these processes require lots of natural resources that have a negative toll on our environment. And because of these needs our society has, we will have to face the repercussions of climate change head on. Currently, the methods of reducing climate change are minimizing our intakes of energy and food, and or by doing various things to optimize every step of our intake. These methods are flawed because they are unsustainable for the well-being of our society and don't have a big impact in the large scheme of things. Now, what if there was a way to reduce climate change without sacrificing the socio, political, and economic factors for the environment? Well, there is a way, and it's called carbon capture technology, and it is the future of this technology that will give us a mechanism to completely deal with this climate crisis without sacrificing the needs of society. To get an understanding of why carbon capture technology is super useful and innovative, we first must understand the cause for climate change right now. Climate change is defined as the overall temperature of the Earth rising, also known as global warming, and the long-term changes of climates. Currently, global temperatures are slowly increasing every single year, with the last decade having records of the hottest years ever. We know that climate change is occurring and the repercussions of it are endless. Rising sea levels, flooding, huge economic damage, losing the ability to grow food in certain areas are just to name a few of the consequences that climate change poses. The main cause for this recent spike in climate change is the anthropogenic greenhouse effect. Anthropogenic meaning human caused, and the greenhouse effect meaning a natural phenomenon that causes gases in our atmosphere to reflect energy back to the Earth. The greenhouse effect has allowed for our climate to be hotter than it should be and to sustain life on Earth. Yet many big industries are pumping out more gas into the atmosphere than ever, which causes the greenhouse effect to create hotter conditions. Specifically, lots of carbon dioxide, or CO2, have been released into the atmosphere, creating an influx of gas that shouldn't even be there. And one thing to note about the greenhouse effect is that it is a feedback loop, meaning that as more gas is in the air, more water vapor is evaporated and allows more gas to be in the air, and so it continues. So as more carbon is released into the air, the hotter our Earth gets. So that begs the question, why don't we stop big companies from releasing all this carbon? Mostly because these big companies have a strong economic incentive to keep making money off these exploitable resources. That is the reason they don't want to stop their carbon output. Carbon capture is the solution for companies to continue to stimulate the economy while addressing climate change as a whole. The idea of carbon capture is what it sounds like, collecting the carbon that would be/is in the atmosphere and storing that carbon elsewhere. And essentially, there are two main methods of carbon capture: collecting the carbon before it enters into the atmosphere and removing carbon that's already in the air. The first method has been done for decades and it involves capturing CO2 from the source of factories and storing that carbon deep underground. This method is still environmentally hazardous, however, as we are still wasting the space for the CO2. The latter of the two methods is a lot more exciting and revolutionary, as it allows us to take pre-existing carbon out of the air, minimizing the negative feedback loop that occurs in the atmosphere. It also allows for something called carbon utilization, which is the process of taking carbon and constructing it into other products. So how does this idea of direct carbon capture work? How can we actually take carbon right outside the air? Current methods involve using a large array of fans that suck in the atmosphere air through a device called a contactor. A chemical absorbent within the contactor bonds to the CO2 as the air is filtered through the contactor, and the new solution is stored within a storage facility under the contactor. It's a simple work of chemistry, and through the power of molecular bonding, CO2 is able to be contained. This is the method known as adsorption. After adsorption, the new carbonate solution is heated so the carbon dioxide is unbonded with the rest of the solution and is captured within a contained facility. Pure CO2 is now contained on Earth's surface rather than maintaining a negative feedback loop in the atmosphere. Now, this is where the exciting stuff really happens. This pure CO2 can be buried just like the first method, but that is also environmentally harmful. Instead, the CO2 can be utilized for different products and be worthwhile. This is because so many things that we have are just different reconstructions of carbon molecules, and it opens a wide variety of exciting uses for all this pure carbon. For example, the company C2CNT are creating carbon nanotubes and material, which is an alternative to metal, and they also perform direct carbon capture. The company Carbon Upcycling Technologies are creating furniture and cement-based products. Breath, yet another company, is creating methanol and fuel from this process. Lastly, the company C4X are creating bioplastics and other fibers that can be constructed into virtually anything. The limitations of carbon utilization are boundless, and it is revolutionizing the world as we know it. Much like anything, however, direct carbon capture still has its issues. The first main barrier for this technology is that it is pricey and has massive infrastructure costs. There isn't a lot of investment going into this technology because of the large precedent for costs associated with it. Also, many companies are using this pure carbon dioxide for things that perpetuate climate change. For example, breath that creates methanol are just pumping that CO2 right back into the atmosphere. And lastly, the technology is just not yet proven enough and it's still in its infancy. And because of that, there isn't a lot of incentive for VCs or investors to come into the industry and actually put money into this new technology. Whatever the large barriers might be, the impacts of this technology are world changing and a definite help to the current climate crisis. Pulling carbon out of the air limits the greenhouse effect from occurring, putting an end to a negative feedback loop. If we can build and foster this technology correctly, it could be the deciding factor to a healthy Earth, or not. There's a ton of economic incentive for companies to use this technology, and it doesn't disrupt the needs that society still needs. It's the compromise and the best of both worlds, which is why this technology is so important. And the fact is, carbon capture is here to stay, and it will have a great impact on the world. The future looks exciting and I can't wait to be a part of it. I give you carbon capture, the solution to climate change. Thank you.